60 years old.
Retired.
Declared obsolete by the United States military over 3 decades ago. And yet, as of April 2nd, 2025, this weapon is actively reshaping the Eastern Front of Europe's most consequential war. Let that sink in for a moment. While billions in cutting-edge Western military aid floods into Ukraine, it is a Cold War-era Howitzer 1 America quietly shelved in the 1990s that is now forcing a strategic recalculation on the battlefield. The data does not lie, and today we follow the data. This is not a weapons review. This is not a battlefield update. What you are about to see is a dissection of how a €230 million arms deal routed through Athens and Prague is quietly rewriting the rules of modern military assistance. Rules that Washington helped design, but chose not to sign its name to directly. In this video, I will give you a strategic lens to cut through the diplomatic language and the press releases, to understand not just what happened, but why it happened this way, and what it signals about every arms deal that comes after it. Stay with me. Let us start with the facts, because before any analysis, the facts must be established. On April 2nd, 2025, Ukraine's 52nd Artillery Brigade posted a routine announcement on social media. Buried inside a list of equipment almost as an afterthought was a designation that stopped military analysts cold: the 203mm M110 self-propelled howitzer.
Confirmed.
Operational. On the Eastern Front, United 24 Media verified the announcement. Defense Express confirmed the deployment sectors. The weapon was real, and it had arrived in numbers. Now, how did Ukraine get its hands on a weapon that the United States military officially retired over 30 years ago? The answer traces back to October 2024. That is when Army Recognition reported that Greece had formally approved the transfer of 60 M110A2 howitzers to Ukraine.
60 units.
Along with 150,000 rounds of ammunition and a package of Zuri rockets. The total value of the deal, approximately $199.4 million, roughly 230 million euros. The transfer route ran through the Czech Republic, the same Czech initiative that has quietly become one of the most effective logistics corridors for Western military assistance into Ukraine. Farakansau Eradikaderins. Think about what that means. This was not a direct American transfer. This was not a headline-grabbing announcement from the Pentagon. This was a sovereign European nation monetizing surplus inventory with full NATO awareness through an established multinational corridor. Now look at what Ukraine actually received inside that package. According to United 24 Media, the ammunition breakdown is as follows: 50,000 M106 high-explosive rounds, 40,000 M650 rocket-assisted projectiles extending the howitzer's effective range to 30 kilometers, 30,000 M509A1 dual-purpose cluster munitions, and 30,000 M404 improved conventional munitions developed specifically for the M110 during its later service life. Natsarakam Erudansari. 4 distinct shell types, each designed for a different category of target. High-value static infrastructure, massed formations,
Armored concentrations.
hardened defensive positions. This is not a blunt instrument. This is a versatile system delivered with a full spectrum of lethality options. Now consider the economics. Defense Express reported that Greece priced each M110 at approximately $520,000 per unit. Multiply that across 60 howitzers, and you arrive at roughly $35.9 million for the guns themselves. That leaves the remaining portion of the €230 million deal allocated entirely to ammunition. Running the numbers, Ukraine's cost per shell lands at under $1,300. $1,300 per round for a projectile carrying 90 kilograms of explosive force to a target 30 kilometers away. And as of December 2024, Ukraine's NATO allies had already channeled more than $4 billion through the Pearl mechanism, the prioritized Ukraine requirements list, a framework that allows NATO members to purchase American military equipment and route it directly to Ukrainian frontline requirements. The architecture was already in place. Greece simply used it. These are not allegations. These are not estimates. Every figure cited here comes from Army Recognition, United 24 Media, Defense Express, and open-source Ukrainian military communications. The receipts are real. Now let us read what they actually say. Here is where most coverage stops. The weapon arrived. Ukraine is happy. Russia is worried. And end of story. But that is not analysis. That is narration. What the data actually reveals when you map the economic incentives, the political architecture, and the battlefield logic simultaneously is something far more structurally significant than a single arms transfer. Let us go deeper. The geopolitics of surplus. Greece has operated the M110A2 since the early 1980s. At its peak, the Hellenic Army maintained approximately 145 units of this system. It was Greece's primary long-range artillery solution for over 4 decades. But Greece is modernizing. Like every NATO member moving toward alliance-wide standardization, Athens is transitioning to the 155mm NATO standard artillery platform. That transition makes the M110 not just outdated, it makes it a liability. Storage costs money. Maintenance costs money. Ammunition that no other NATO partner uses costs money. So Greece had a decision to make. Scrap the inventory. Or monetize it. At $520,000 per unit, Greece chose to monetize. And in doing so, Athens transformed a depreciating asset into hard currency while simultaneously fulfilling a NATO burden-sharing obligation. This is not charity. This is rational state economics. But here is the question that strategic observers are now asking. Greece shares a deeply complicated relationship with Turkey, a fellow NATO member with whom it maintains overlapping territorial disputes in the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean. Some analysts in Athens have raised the concern: does transferring 60 long-range artillery systems reduce Greece's own deterrence posture at a moment of regional tension? It is a legitimate question, and it does not have a clean answer. The Greek government's implicit response appears to be that the remaining 85 units, if they are in serviceable condition, provide sufficient capability, and that the financial and diplomatic returns from the transfer outweigh the marginal reduction in artillery mass. But that calculus depends entirely on assumptions about readiness that have not been publicly verified. Why not America directly? The architecture of deliberate distance. This is the question that cuts to the core of the entire transfer. The United States produced 1,100 M110 howitzers beginning in 1963. The system was officially retired from American service in the 1990s. And yet, according to reporting from Real Clear Defense, some M110 barrels were repurposed as structural casings for GBU-28 bunker-busting bombs deployed during the Gulf War against Iraq. What happened to the rest? That remains at best ambiguous. What is not ambiguous is this: if serviceable M110 units or components remain in American inventory, Washington has not moved to transfer them directly to Ukraine. Strategic analysts observing this pattern point to a deliberate architectural choice. The Pearl mechanism, the prioritized Ukraine requirements list, exists precisely to create transactional distance between American stockpiles and Ukrainian front lines. NATO allies purchase. NATO allies transfer. American fingerprints remain one step removed from the point of delivery. This is not evasion. This is escalation management. It is a calibrated approach designed to sustain military assistance while preserving diplomatic off-ramps in a conflict where both sides possess nuclear deterrence capabilities. The data from the field suggests this model is working. Over $4 billion has moved through Pearl as of December 2024 without triggering the threshold responses that direct American transfers might provoke. But critics of this approach, and there are credible ones, argue that deliberate distance also creates deliberate delay. That routing assistance through multilateral mechanisms introduces friction, reduces speed, and ultimately costs Ukraine on the battlefield what it gains in diplomatic insulation for Washington. Both arguments carry weight. Neither is wrong. The opposing view is the M110. Actually a game changer? Intellectual honesty requires confronting this directly. Institutions like the International Institute for Strategic Studies and analysts affiliated with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace have raised measured skepticism about the M110's battlefield impact. Their argument centers on 3 structural limitations. First, rate of fire. The M110 fires 1 round every 2 minutes under standard conditions, reaching a maximum of 2 rounds per minute only during sustained high-intensity operations. Against faster, more mobile artillery systems, this creates a vulnerability window. Second, crew requirements. 13 personnel per unit is a significant manpower commitment for a military already managing severe attrition across multiple front sectors. Third, logistical singularity. The M110 operates on 203mm ammunition, a caliber that no other active NATO artillery system currently uses. That means Ukraine has received a weapon that cannot draw from the broader NATO ammunition supply chain. It is dependent entirely on the stockpiles that arrived with the transfer. These are not trivial concerns. They are legitimate operational constraints. The counter-analysis, why the skeptics may be missing the point. Here is what the skeptical framework fails to adequately account for. Russia is not fighting a 21st century war. Battlefield data from eastern Ukraine consistently shows that Russian offensive doctrine relies heavily on dense infantry formations, light armored vehicles, and attritional pressure along narrow axis advances. This is not a high-tempo maneuver warfare environment. This is a grinding, positional conflict that in many of its tactical characteristics resembles warfare from 6 decades ago. And the M110 was built precisely for that threat model. In a positional conflict, rate of fire matters less than projectile mass and target effect. A 90-kilogram warhead arriving at a hardened position or a concentrated formation does not need to arrive quickly. It needs to arrive accurately. And with rocket-assisted munitions extending range to 30 kilometers, the M110 can engage targets well beyond the threat envelopes of most Russian counter-battery systems currently deployed in the theater. There is also the question of battlefield complementarity. The 52nd Artillery Brigade does not use the M110 in isolation. It operates alongside the domestically produced Bodana precision howitzer and the RM-70 Vampire multiple launch rocket system. Each platform occupies a distinct engagement layer. The Vampire neutralizes advancing formations. The M110 destroys hardened rear positions that the Vampire cannot effectively engage. The Bodana reaches deeper still, targeting logistics nodes, command infrastructure, and ammunition storage beyond the M110's effective range. Another all-time not signs. This is not 3 weapons. This is one integrated fire system with layered depth. The zombie weapon doctrine, using retired Western equipment that is perfectly matched to an opponent fighting with vintage Soviet tactics, is not a coincidence. Analysts observing Ukraine's procurement patterns suggest this is increasingly deliberate. Ukraine is not simply taking whatever it can get. It is selecting legacy systems whose threat models align with the specific operational environment it faces. That distinction matters enormously, and most coverage is missing it entirely. Every strategic shift begins somewhere small. A transfer announcement buried in a social media post. A weapon that most defense ministries stopped thinking about 30 years ago. And then the ripples begin. Let us trace where they go. The immediate battlefield calculus, Kramatorsk, and what it means. The 52nd Artillery Brigade is not operating in a quiet sector. Defense Express confirms its current deployment spans the Kharkiv and Kramatorsk operational areas. And Kramatorsk is not incidental geography. Kramatorsk is one of 4 major urban centers forming what military planners refer to as the Donetsk Fortress Belt, a defensive corridor stretching approximately 50 kilometers along the H-20 highway connecting Kostiantynivka and Sloviansk. This belt represents one of Ukraine's most critical defensive anchors in the east. If it holds, Russia's broader operational objective of consolidating control over the Donbass faces structural resistance. If it fractures, the strategic consequences extend far beyond any single city. The arrival of M110 howitzers in this sector does not merely add firepower. It adds a specific category of firepower that was previously absent. The ability to engage hardened targets, fortified positions, reinforced command nodes, heavy equipment concentrations at range, with projectiles that lighter systems cannot replicate. Ukraine's kill zone architecture was already among the most sophisticated defensive constructions of this conflict. United 24. Media's detailed breakdown describes a layered obstacle system combining anti-tank ditches, dragon's teeth barriers, dense mine networks, aerial drone coverage, and tunnel-based infantry ambush corridors. These kill zones do not simply destroy advancing forces. They channel them. They compress movement options and force opposing units into predictable corridors. Now place M110 howitzers at the artillery layer of that architecture. 90-kilogram projectiles arriving at the points where channeled formations concentrate. The mathematics of that equation are not complex. They are simply severe. The economic ripple warfare as a financial equation. Ukraine enters 2026 facing a fiscal gap of approximately $45 billion against a planned government expenditure of $112 billion. The European Union's committed loan package of $105 billion with initial disbursements expected as early as April, according to BBC reporting, will close a significant portion of that gap. But the pressure remains acute. In that context, the M110 transfer is not merely a military decision. It is a financial strategy. Consider the return on investment calculation. 60 howitzers acquired at $520,000 each. Ammunition at under $1,300 per round. Against an opposing military that fields tank systems valued between $500,000 and $2 million per unit, artillery systems worth comparable sums, and logistics infrastructure whose disruption carries multiplying operational costs. A single effective fire mission can generate a return that exceeds the cost of dozens of rounds expended. For a nation managing wartime economics under severe constraint, that ratio is not a secondary consideration. It is central to how Ukraine is structuring its entire approach to sustained resistance. This is warfare as resource optimization, and the M110 fits that framework with unusual precision. The geopolitical precedent, a template being watched globally. Here is where the butterfly effect extends beyond Ukraine's borders entirely. The Greece to Czech Republic to Ukraine transfer model has now demonstrated something that defense ministries across multiple continents are studying carefully. That legacy inventory equipment classified as surplus, obsolete, or economically burdensome to maintain can be converted into strategic currency through structured multilateral transfer mechanisms without direct superpower fingerprints on the transaction. Spain operates M110 howitzers. So does Jordan. So does Morocco. Turkey, a NATO member, maintaining a distinctly complex relationship with both the alliance and Russia, simultaneously also fields the system. Each of those inventories now represents a potential node in an extended transfer network. The question is not whether the template is viable. Greece proved it is. The question is which governments will choose to activate it and under what political conditions. Analysts observing procurement patterns suggest that if Ukraine's 52nd Brigade demonstrates measurable operational impact with its M110 systems over the coming months, the political case for additional transfers from other operators becomes substantially easier to construct. Results in this context are the most persuasive diplomatic argument available. The broader structural shift redefining military assistance. Step back from the immediate conflict for a moment. Look at the architectural implication. For decades, military assistance operated on a relatively binary model. Nations either donated equipment absorbing the political and economic cost, or they sold it through formal government to government channels that required extensive negotiation, congressional notification in the American system, and public accountability. What the Pearl mechanism combined with the Czech initiative has created is a third pathway, structured, multilateral, financially compensated, and operationally direct. Ukraine specifies what it needs. Allies identify matching surplus inventory. Transfers proceed through established corridors. Costs are distributed across the alliance rather than concentrated on any single contributor. If this model holds, and the data from $4+ billion already moved through Pearl suggests it is holding, it represents a durable reconfiguration of how military assistance will function in future conflicts. Not just for Ukraine. For every future scenario where a smaller nation requires sustained external military support against a larger adversary. The M110 is 60 years old, but the system that delivered it may be the most modern thing about this entire story. So here is where we stand. 60 howitzers are in the field. The 52nd Brigade is operational, and a transfer architecture that bypasses direct American involvement has proven it can deliver Cold War steel to a 21st century front line with remarkable efficiency. But 85 M110 units remain in Greek inventory. Spain has not moved. Jordan has not moved. And somewhere in American storage facilities, the fate of over 1,000 retired howitzers remains publicly unaccounted for. The weapon has arrived. The template is proven. The question now is who moves next and how quickly battlefield results translate into political will across 5 separate NATO member capitals. That answer will not come from press releases. It will come from the field. And when it does, we will be here to read it for you. Subscribe now, because the next move on this board is already in motion. You just cannot see it yet.